Rodney Phillips and Sam Lissjack were two men whose lives became intertwined through a shared path of crime, violence and loyalty to the infamous underworld figure Matthew Johnson. Their criminal activities, both inside and outside prison walls, left a trail of chaos and destruction, culminating in Sam Lissjack's untimely death and Rodney Phillips' repeated incarcerations. This video explores their backgrounds, their involvement with the notorious prisoners of war gang, and the chain of events that sealed their fates. Rodney Phillips was born on the 19th of August 1991, growing up in the working-class Melbourne suburb of Glenroy. He was raised by his mother, along with his twin brother and 3 other siblings. Although his early life showed some promise, it would soon be overshadowed by a descent into crime and violence. Rodney left school during year 11, initially pursuing a plumbing pre-apprenticeship. However, logistical and travel difficulties cut that opportunity short after only 6 months. He then secured part-time employment at McDonald's, where he performed admirably for over 2 years, working 5 nights a week and earning praise from his manager for a strong work ethic and positive interactions with both customers and colleagues. Yet, behind this veneer of stability, Rodney was spiralling into a life of crime. By age 17, in 2008, his formal criminal record began, and from that point onward, he would spend all but roughly 5 months of the next 7 years in custody. The turning point came in May 2009, when Rodney was charged with attempted murder. Initially remanded in a youth justice centre and later transferred to an adult prison, he was ultimately sentenced in March 2010 to 5 years and 3 months imprisonment, with a non-parole period of 3 years after pleading guilty to 1 count of intentionally causing serious injury and 3 counts of intentionally causing injury. Even while awaiting trial, Rodney continued to offend. In September 2009 and May 2010, the Children's Court sentenced him for prior offences, including theft of a car, resisting police, and possessing controlled weapons. The pattern of offending continued in custody. In January 2011, he was sentenced to an additional 6 months imprisonment for recklessly causing serious injury committed while on remand. In July 2012, at nearly 21, Rodney was granted parole after spending over 3 years in prison. For a brief period, he appeared to make genuine efforts to rehabilitate. He completed a drug and alcohol course, obtained a forklift driver's license, and earned a certificate in warehouse operation. However, these gains were short-lived. By November 2012, his parole was revoked for non-compliance, and he was returned to prison in December. By March 2013, he was transferred to the Charlotte unit at Port Phillip Prison, where he endured strict management conditions and near constant lockdowns. In June 2013, he received a further 4 months imprisonment for recklessly causing injury, followed by 2 months for arson after setting fire to his cell in protest. In November 2013, he was sentenced to an additional 3 months for a fray, recklessly causing injury and assault, again all committed within the prison walls. By his early 20s, Rodney Phillips had become a hardened and institutionalised figure within Victoria's prison system, one whose future would be defined behind bars. Just quickly, if you're enjoying this video so far and want more stories from the Australian underworld, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It really helps me out and helps the channel grow. Sam Lissjack's descent into crime was even earlier and more chaotic. Born on the 7th of June 1993, he came into the world already on the margins. His parents, both teenagers, separated soon after his birth. Raised initially by his mother, Sam's life took a dramatic turn at age 8 when he was placed in state care, a move that severed his relationship with his mother permanently. What followed was a life of instability. Between the ages of 8 and 14, Sam lived in a staggering 17 foster homes, often absconding from placements. He never attended secondary school. Instead, the streets and later the prison system became his classroom. Sam's criminal record began when he was just 13, but what started as petty shoplifting, the typical offence of a troubled child, soon escalated into far more serious crimes, including armed robbery, threats of grievous harm, and burglary. By 16, he had already incurred convictions for burglary, robbery, and intentionally causing injury, leading to a 10-month sentence in a youth justice centre. By 17, further convictions for multiple armed robberies and burglaries resulted in an 18-month sentence. During this latter sentence, an unexpected development occurred. His paternal grandmother contacted him for the first time. This was a brief glimmer of hope. Upon release in March 2012, he moved in with her and even found employment as a butcher. However, the job lasted only weeks, since his employer could not afford to keep him on, and just a month later in April 2012, Sam was arrested again, this time entering adult custody. He ultimately received a 2-year sentence for a litany of offences: theft of motor vehicles, arson, burglary, reckless conduct endangering life, and driving offences. While on remand, Sam joined a prison riot, adding 7 more months to his sentence. In August 2012, he was transferred to Barwon Prison and placed under 23-hour lockdown in a management unit. It was here, in one of Victoria's toughest prisons, that Sam crossed paths with one of the most feared men in the system, Matthew Charles Johnson. Matthew Charles Johnson was a man forged in violence. Born in 1973, he spent most of his adult life trapped in the brutal cycle of Victoria's prison system. Known as the General, Johnson was a career violent offender with a fearsome reputation, a rigid belief in old prison codes, and a pathological hatred of informers. By the late 2000s, he had become one of the most feared and charismatic figures in maximum security prisons. The prison system, already divided by gang allegiances and a warped hierarchy of honour, provided fertile ground for Johnson to build something more: an informal but deeply loyal brotherhood. The Prisoner of War Gang. The gang was not a conventional outfit with colours or clubhouses. It was a loose but deadly alliance of hardened career criminals, men with nothing left to lose, who embraced Johnson's rigid anti-informer ideology. They saw themselves as the last defenders of an unspoken code of prison honour that was rapidly eroding amid deals and plea bargains. At the heart of this brotherhood stood Johnson, its undisputed leader, feared and revered in equal measure. Johnson's most infamous act, the one that would forever etch his name into Australian criminal history, was the murder of Carl Williams, Melbourne's notorious underworld figure. Williams, a key player in Melbourne's bloody gangland wars of the early 2000s, was serving 35 years in Barwon Prison for ordering multiple murders. By 2010, after years of surviving assassination attempts and underworld betrayals, Williams had begun to view cooperation with police as his last remaining currency. In secret, he struck a deal with authorities, agreeing to provide detailed information about corrupt detectives and fellow criminals. His evidence implicated former detective Paul Dale, notorious hitman Rodney Collins, and others involved in the unsolved murders of Terence and Christine Hodson. At first, news of his cooperation was closely guarded, but prisons are porous places, and word soon reached Johnson that Williams had turned informant. In his eyes, this was the ultimate betrayal. Johnson and Williams had known each other for around a decade and had even cultivated what appeared to be a friendship inside Barwon. In 2008, they formally requested to be housed together in the prison's Acacia unit, despite staff warnings about the risk. For a time, the alliance appeared genuine, but as Williams' cooperation became undeniable, Johnson's paranoia and sense of prison justice overtook any friendship. In Johnson's mind, Williams now represented an intolerable threat. If his testimony led to greater police scrutiny, no one would be safe, and the General could not allow that to happen. The murder was methodically planned. On April 19th, 2010, Johnson and Williams were the only 2 inmates in the exercise area of the Acacia unit. Security in the unit was notoriously lax, with guards in a separate area and CCTV coverage that did not fully monitor the actions inside the exercise yard. Johnson retrieved a metal rod from an exercise bike, a makeshift weapon he had prepared in advance. As Williams sat reading a newspaper, Johnson approached from behind and struck with cold precision at least 7 brutal blows that caved in Williams' skull, causing catastrophic brain injuries. Williams died almost instantly. Johnson was tried in 2011. He claimed self-defense, alleging Williams had planned to attack him, but the court dismissed this as fantasy. The true motive was clear. Johnson believed Williams had betrayed the code and had to pay with his life. Johnson was sentenced to life imprisonment with a 32-year non-parole period, but his legend within the prison system only grew. While Johnson was solidifying his power in Barwon, the reach of the prisoner of war gang extended beyond a single prison. Its ideology attracted new members across the Victorian prison network, and among them were Rodney and Sam. Though incarcerated in different facilities, both men became aligned with Johnson's worldview during their time behind bars. They embraced the prisoner of war gang, marking themselves as members of a fraternity where loyalty and violence were intertwined. For Sam, the connection was personal. While housed at Barwon, he came into direct contact with Matthew Johnson himself. According to police, this went beyond mere recruitment, it was indoctrination. As one source bluntly described it, Sam completely fell under his spell. Under Johnson's influence, he transformed into a hardened prisoners of war loyalist, deeply committed to the gang's cause. Rodney, though not meeting Johnson face to face in the same way, embraced the gang's creed from within his own prison environment, forging bonds with other like-minded inmates. After 2 years and 8 months behind bars, Rodney Phillips walked free on July 2nd, 2015, while Sam Lissjack was released just 2 days later on July 4th after 3 years and 3 months. Neither was placed on parole or supervised, an oversight that would soon have serious consequences. By the time both men were eventually released back into the community, their allegiance to the general remained unbroken. To Johnson, these men were valuable extensions of his will on the outside, and to Rodney and Sam, Johnson was more than a mentor. He was a commander whose orders would be obeyed without question. Once back on the streets, they were ready to act as his enforcers. Just hours after Sam's release, the men embarked on a violent campaign against the family of the late Carl Williams. The main target was Roberta Williams, widow of the infamous Melbourne underworld figure. Since Johnson's sentencing, Roberta had been subject to death threats from the prisoners of war leader. Investigations later revealed that Johnson's motive was to pressure Roberta into making a false statement, claiming Williams had plotted to kill Johnson. This fabricated claim could serve as grounds for Johnson to appeal his conviction, arguing his killing of Williams was an act of self-defense. Rodney and Sam were likely deployed with this same purpose, to intimidate, coerce, and make clear the reach and ruthlessness of the prisoners of war gang. On July 4th, Rodney borrowed his brother's green Hyundai to move belongings from his mother's home in Glenroy to his address in Pascoe Vale. Among these were a slab of Corona beer and 2 red plastic fuel containers. Rodney told a neighbour the beer could be consumed, but requested the empty bottles back, foreshadowing their grim use. In the early hours of July 5th, Rodney and Sam made their first attempt to intimidate Roberta and George Williams, Carl's father, by throwing Molotov cocktails at their homes. However, they struck the wrong targets. Believing George lived at 14 Catandra Crescent, Broadmeadows, they launched 2 flaming petrol bombs there. The actual residence, however, was 2 doors down at number 18. Damage was minimal and unnoticed for days. Later that morning, they repeated the error at 72 Primrose Street, Essendon, mistakenly targeting Roberta's neighbours instead of her home at number 82. They created and threw 9 Molotov cocktails. Most failed to ignite, while neighbours quickly discovered and extinguished the small fires, sparing the property from serious damage. Frustrated by their botched arson attempts, the pair intensified their campaign. On the evening of July 6th, Rodney and Sam stole a 2002 Ford Escape in Endeavour Hills. In the early hours of July 7th, armed with a 12-gauge shotgun, Rodney and Sam made their way back to Broadmeadows, this time accurately identifying George's residence at 18 Catandra Crescent. At approximately 3:15 AM, they fired 2 shotgun blasts at the front fence, shattering the letterbox and leaving a jagged hole in the wooden fence. The shooting prompted an immediate police response, and 2 marked patrol cars were dispatched to Roberta's address at Primrose Street, Essendon. The driver of one of the 2 cars was Constable Benjamin Ashmole, a young officer just 18 months into his career, and with him was Constable Thomas Wopsle. About 10 minutes after the shooting at George's home, Ashmole saw the stolen Ford Escape driving west along Albion Street. He immediately decided to follow the stolen car and check the driver, while the second police vehicle remained outside Roberta's home. The chase ended in Robinson Street, a dead end near St. Monica's Primary School. The Ford Escape stopped in the school's car park, where Ashmole positioned his police car strategically to block the escape route, leaving room for the stolen car to reverse. At this moment, a shotgun was produced from the passenger window of the Ford Escape and fired directly at the driver's seat. Ashmole saw the gun before it fired and ducked, but he was not fast enough. 14 shotgun pellets hit the back right side of his head. As the Ford Escape drove away, Constable Wopsle rendered first aid to his partner. Later, Constable Ashmole was taken to the Royal Melbourne Hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery. Remarkably, he survived. Surgeons removed 3 shotgun pellets, but 11 remain lodged in his head, leaving lasting scarring. He spent 6 months recovering before returning to duty, though he continues to suffer from persistent headaches to this day. After the shooting, the Ford Escape fled the scene. The 2 men attempted to hide by parking in a driveway in Strathmore before returning briefly to Rodney's home. Soon after, they drove to an industrial area in North Coburg, where they abandoned and set fire to the stolen vehicle, destroying it almost completely. The police investigation into the violent shooting of 1st Constable Ashmole quickly led to the arrests of Rodney and Sam on July 21st, 2015. Rodney was apprehended at his New Oak Park residence, while Sam was arrested as a passenger in a car in Morwell. Both men exercised their right to silence during formal interviews. Forensic evidence was pivotal in linking the men to the shooting. 12-gauge shotgun pellets matching those found at the scene were recovered, and DNA from a filler cap matched both Rodney and Sam. Mobile phone records and CCTV footage also placed them at critical locations during the crime. A chilling discovery during a search of Sam's home offered a disturbing glimpse into his mindset. Police found homemade posters mocking the Williams family. One poster featured a smiling photo of Carl Williams with the word "missing" and a crude insult below, while another showed Roberta Williams under the heading "should be missing." Both posters stood as a chilling symbol of Sam's twisted obsession with the Williams crime family and his unwavering loyalty to Johnson. In 2017, Rodney and Sam faced trial on serious charges, including attempted murder. However, in a significant development on February 6, 2017, both men pleaded guilty to a string of lesser charges: recklessly causing injury, reckless conduct endangering serious injury, criminal damage, arson, and possessing a firearm while prohibited. While the trial was still ongoing, on March 2, 2017, Rodney's mother, Leonie Stewart, was shot through the door of her suburban Glenroy home. Investigators suspected the attack was revenge for her testimony against her son. Stewart sustained life-threatening injuries, spending weeks in the hospital and undergoing surgery to remove shrapnel. Despite the trauma, she expressed love for her son and denied blaming him, though she feared for her safety. On March 13, 2017, Rodney and Sam were sentenced in the Supreme Court to 8 years and 7 years and 10 months, respectively. Both sentences reflected the gravity of shooting a police officer, though they were significantly lower than what would have followed a conviction for attempted murder. The sentence sparked outrage. Constable Ashmole's mother condemned the jail terms as inadequate, insisting they did not reflect her son's suffering, and the Victorian Police Association echoed her sentiments, decrying the justice system's leniency towards those who attack officers performing their duties. Regardless of the sentence, one thing was certain: Rodney and Sam were once again behind bars. Just as in the past, Rodney's time in prison did not temper his violent tendencies. In May 2020, he was given an additional 2 months after pleading guilty to assaulting prison officers and setting fires in his Barwon prison cell between July and October 2019. The incidents occurred while Rodney was in solitary confinement, and the court described his behaviour as troubling, especially given the high-profile nature of his crimes. In September 2023, with his original sentence nearly complete, Rodney once again faced new charges. He assaulted an emergency services worker and committed 2 counts of criminal damage by fire. He was sentenced to a combined 240-day term alongside fines totaling nearly $60,000. These incidents underscored Rodney's reputation as one of Victoria's highest risk inmates. In 2023, while Rodney remained in custody, Sam was finally granted his freedom. However, mere months after his release, on November 9th, 2023, he was found shot dead near Fernbank Creek Road, an access route to the M1 motorway near Port Macquarie on the state's mid-north coast. His violent death came at the tail end of what police allege was a terrifying shooting spree carried out by Sam and two of his Victorian associates, Tyrone Russell and Corey James Glass, who had travelled north together in a Mercedes-Benz ute. According to police, the three men drove from Victoria into New South Wales earlier in the week. What followed was a chaotic night of random violence across the mid-north coast that culminated in murder. At around 1:40 AM on November 9th, a motorist travelling along the M1 motorway near Coopernook, just past Taree, was shot at from the passing ute. The victim was lucky to escape with only a graze to the arm, treated at the scene by paramedics. Roughly 3 hours later, at about 4:40 AM, police received reports of more shots fired at another vehicle along the M1 at the Hatch, near Port Macquarie. No injuries were reported in this attack. Then, just 35 minutes later, another motorist came under fire on the M1 at nearby Kundabung. Again, no injuries were reported. However, the violence didn't stop there. Shortly after the Kundabung shooting, the spree escalated when shots were fired directly at a police vehicle on the M1 near Fernbank Creek Road. For investigators, this was a grim deja vu. Sam, fresh from prison for shooting a police officer, was once again opening fire on the very people tasked with keeping him off the streets. Fortunately, no officers were injured this time. Soon after this violent confrontation, Sam's story came to an abrupt, brutal end. Police responding to the incident discovered Sam's body dumped on the side of a Fernbank Creek Road, the very spot where their vehicle had come under fire. He had been shot dead. Investigators quickly established a crime scene and launched a major operation to track down the remaining two men from the car. That same afternoon, police caught up with Russell and Glass, finding them hiding on a riverbank behind Geoffrey Debenham Street in Kempsey, about an hour's drive north of Port Macquarie. Glass was immediately arrested and taken to Kempsey Police Station, where he was charged with 3 counts of discharging a firearm with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and 3 counts of firing a firearm in or near a public place. Russell was initially taken to the hospital under police guard. Upon his release 2 days later, the 32-year-old was also brought to Kempsey Police Station, but faced far graver charges. He was charged with murder and 6 firearms-related offences. Police alleged that after the group's violent road trip across the mid-north coast, tensions boiled over inside the car. Investigators believed a falling out between Sam and Russell led the older man to shoot Sam dead before dumping his body by the roadside. As of mid-2025, both Russell and Glass remain in custody, their cases moving slowly through the court system. The men are still awaiting trial, and police continue to build their case around what they allege was a planned and deliberate armed crime spree that spiraled into murder. Sam's death marked a brutal end to a life spent largely behind bars, defined by violence, misplaced loyalties, and a relentless cycle of crime that ultimately consumed him. After 8 years in jail, Rodney Phillips was finally a free man. But by June 2025, he was once again standing in the dock of a Melbourne courtroom after being caught with a loaded firearm at a women's refuge in St Albans. Just like Sam, it didn't take long for him to slip back into the shadows of Melbourne's underworld. A security guard working at the refuge watched as Rodney moved suspiciously through the building's underground car park, transferring items from the boot of a car. The guard followed from a distance as Rodney and another man entered an upstairs apartment. Through the doorway, he spotted what appeared to be a gun resting on a couch and immediately called the police. A short time later, officers arrived. As they moved through the building, they encountered Rodney stepping out of an elevator with a loaded firearm tucked into his waistband. In his possession, officers also found a small stash of prescription drugs, a knife, jewellery and zip ties fashioned into makeshift handcuffs. It was a sinister collection of items that suggested a violent plan was underway, one that officers had fortunately intercepted before it could be carried out. Rodney was arrested and taken into custody. In court, he pleaded guilty to drug possession, a firearm offence, and handling goods suspected to be the proceeds of crime. He was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in jail and fined $400. The judge heard that Rodney suffered from PTSD linked to his lengthy prison stays, but his extensive criminal record and repeated violent incidents highlighted the ongoing challenge of managing his behaviour and risk to the community. Once again, incarceration appeared to be the only viable option to control his persistent threat. The violent paths taken by Rodney Phillips and Sam Lissjack ultimately led them to 2 very different fates. Sam died alone on the side of a New South Wales road, betrayed and gunned down by someone he once trusted. Rodney, in contrast, is still alive, but trapped in a relentless cycle of crime and imprisonment. After years behind bars, additional violent offences and a fresh sentence in 2025, his grip on freedom continues to slip. Yet, unlike Sam, Rodney still has a choice, however narrow it may seem. Whether he will ever break free from the gang world and violent patterns that have dominated his life remains uncertain. For a man who has known only crime and prison walls, redemption will be the hardest fight of all. This brings us to the end of the case. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Till next time, take care.